Good afternoon. I know people are filing into our Zoom webinar room. My name is Allison Kaplan. I'm Director of Education for the National First Ladies Library, located at the National First Ladies Historic Site in Canton, Ohio. And I want to tell you just before we get started today about some upcoming programs and activities here. So we do plenty of programs related to the First Ladies of the United States and women's history. Most of them are virtual right now. We went virtual during the pandemic, and we continue to be virtual because we've had such a great response of people coming to our programs and interacting with us. So you can always connect to us via Zoom through Eventbrite. And we have a number of upcoming programs, but I also want to tell you some special information. We have an exhibition coming up that opens in May that might be of interest to attendees of today's program. And that is Beyond Camelot. It opens May 2nd, and it is focused on Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, her life in the White House and beyond. So it's kind of unique to presidential or First Lady related historic sites, because we're not just talking about her time in the White House, we're talking about everything. And we are very happy to have received a really cool gift to us from the star of Say Yes to the Dress Atlanta, Monty Durham, and it includes all sorts of Jacqueline Kennedy memorabilia, as well as an original copy of Jackie's wedding dress, which was created by amazing African-American dress designer Ann Lowe. So that opens May 2nd. So please come to that if you get a chance. Wow. And this kind of kicks off our programming related to Jackie. And so we're excited about that. This Thursday, we have a curator talk. We also have our book club coming up, a talk about Girl Scouts and the White House, and another film next month called Nobody Wants Us, which is a documentary related to refugees and the support Eleanor Roosevelt gave to them. So again, want to thank everyone for coming today, and we're going to get our conversation started. So people who are here today, you are probably very familiar with the iconic documentary by the Maisels, Grey Gardens, and as part of this program in collaboration with Stark Library, we try to connect people with an online documentary or film that connects to First Ladies or women's history. We try to share that link with you so you can watch it and we can come and discuss it, whether we discuss it as a group or we have a special guest on. We want to encourage you to use the chat, say hello to us, ask questions, tell us what you liked about the film. And today I'm so excited because we have a very special guest. So this is our second time. Last year we did a discussion of Grey Gardens, but when I saw that summer was a possibility, which is kind of a prequel by a different director that takes chunks of early footage created by the Maisels that was and connects it to the artist Peter Beard and his experience on Montauk with Lee, all of this amazing footage. It made a lot of sense to invite a special guest to our Grey Gardens related discussion. So I am very excited. I can't even tell you how happy I am to have Jerry Torre here with us today. So I'm gonna tell you all a little bit about Jerry, because you may know him from the film Grey Gardens, but story is so much larger than that. So he is an artist who has shown work all over New York, in Canada and beyond. He has been a visiting artist at Storm King Art Center. He's received widespread recognition in many outlets and magazines, including the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, for his amazing stone carving. There's actually a documentary that you can watch on Vimeo and see him carve, but he's probably best known to us as the handyman in the film Grey Gardens, where he's referred to lovingly as the Marble Faun. And we also, if you read his memoir, you'll get to know him as not only the gardener and the assistant to the Bouviers, but as a gardener for the royal family in Saudi Arabia, the assistant to Wayland Flowers and his puppet, and part of helping out with cabaret acts in the 1970s, and a taxi driver. So he has had many adventures beyond Grey Gardens. He released this amazing memoir, The Marble Faun of Grey Gardens, a memoir of the Beales, the Maisel brothers, and Jacqueline Kennedy, with film historian Tony Maeda. In 2018, it just released an audiobook as well, which is really amazing. So Jerry, we're so excited to have you here. Welcome. It's really a pleasure to connect with you.
Great. Thank you for inviting me here. Thanks, Alice. And hello, Grey Gardens. I'm honored. Thank you so much for being here this day. I'm very excited myself. It's been a long, many years since Mrs. Beale and Edie and I shared our lives together. And this means a lot to me. Thank you. Overwhelmed, really. Thanks. Is that enough? Thanks. I mean, I can just go, thank you.
No, that's perfect. And I want to encourage people, if you have questions for Jerry about his experience in life, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll keep digging for them. But Jerry, can you tell us a little bit about your early experiences? You had a pretty rough childhood, but you were really drawn to the outdoors as a young man. What attracted you to that gardening experience?
That's a good question, Allison. Well, I had a rough childhood, and that's the fact. My father was determined to be him with me and dictate my lifestyle. I'll calm down now. Hold on. But I didn't care for the way he was treating me, and I didn't care for being beat a lot. So I decided to finally one day that I would just run away, and I did. And between that time, I had an uncle who had a property in halfway out in Long Island, Lake Ronkonkoma, and he was building a house, literally a fort. It was a beautiful home. It's still there. And he would do this. He would take stones, cobblestones from Brooklyn and the streets of Brooklyn when they were renovating the systems, electric and sewage and so on. And he would collect them and take them out and to eastern Long Island, Lake Ronkonkoma. And I loved my godfather, Freddie, and his wife, Carrie. So we went to the house and the property every Friday night. And the reason being is because I wanted to be safe and sound, and I needed to be comforted. So he would take me under his wing, and he would drive, and we'd get out to East Lake Ronkonkoma, where on a Saturday morning, bright and early, he'd have a pail, a hammer, and a chisel, and I would start leveling the cobblestone so they could be employed, attached in part of the very house that he built, the fireplace and everything. He was a master craftsman. There, I learned there were actually live animals like rabbits and chipmunks and birds, and I was fascinated. He also had a large farm there, potato and vegetable and pears. And I just found it also fascinating nature from being with him there for the year that I would go there with him to help clean stones and prepare the garden and plant the garden. And I just gravitated towards nature. And it was a fascination. I was a Brooklyn kid. I didn't know rabbits even existed, or turtles. So I was fascinated to know that life had a lot more to it than running from my father and, being away from, all the things that were natural. There was a cemetery in Brooklyn called Greenwood Cemetery, and we would go under the rusted fence. We had a bunch of friends, youngsters, 9, 10, under the fence and go into the cemetery, and it was our park. There were 3 little ponds, and there were birds, and there were chipmunks, But most of all, there were stone sculptures, monuments, headstones. Matter of fact, the Whitney family's got a mausoleum there. It's splendid. That all impressed me. That was my first desire to observe and to want to carve sculpture. I said, look at these beautiful pieces, of art. And it started a fire in my mind. So I went out to Long Island. I learned how to survive. And then I ran away for good. And I just went to my uncle who then helped me finish high school out there. And I did. And then in high school, I met a fellow that introduced me to Eastern Long Island. And he was a gentleman still in my life. We went out there. He had a little fishing cottage on Gardiner's Bay. And there he and I were paisans. We're really close. And he said, but you can stay here, but you have to find a job. So I said, great, no problem. And I did. I looked in the East Hampton store. There was a little note looking for an assistant gardener in East Hampton, period, phone number. That's all. I called and I went for the interview and I was hired. And I said, is this where I will work? It was Mr. Getty's property. And although I didn't really get along with him either, no one seemed to get along with him. But that's the way it was. He was a little bit stubborn. Anyway, I worked there and I had a little room over the garage and 3 meals a day and $100 a week. And it was a special place because on the ocean, swimming pool, grand old lawns and gardens. And that's where I started learning more about gardening. And that's where, should I go on about this?
Yeah, that's great. And can you talk a little bit about once you made it out to the Hamptons and were working for Getty, how you encountered the Grey Gardens?
Gee, yes, I sure can. It was many afternoons when my chores were done. It was sort of simple because I was there all the time. So I just trimmed this flower or a branch that had fallen, some leaves in the swimming pool. So my chores were quick. I woke up early. I was excited to be in the country. The ocean was there. I'd get up and do my chores. It was very simple. And I went, I bought a bicycle, a Beale, a blue Peugeot bicycle. And I rode on every country road I could ride down except one. And that was the only one I didn't. And I said, all right, let's head this way and I'll ride down this road, Lily Pond Lane. And I did. Summertime, summer day, glorious. And I went to the end of the road and make a right. And as the road narrowed, these hedges were 3 stories tall. And I said, those are the hedges around Mr. Getty's one section of his property. But those were only 4 feet tall. But these were 30, every bit of it. And I said, what? This is odd. And I went past the privet hedges and I made a left on my bicycle. And I'm looking, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw what I learned later was the boy's bedroom. The mansion was covered in vines. There was only one peak I could make any sense of. It wasn't covered with many vines, and I knew all of those vines, and I liked them. But I went and I tumbled off my bicycle, Alice, not paying attention to the road in front of me, which was about 10 feet wide, a little country road. As I'm stumbling off the bicycle, and I remember this so well, I said, what did I just see? What is this place? And it didn't make any sense because all of the estates in that vicinity of Georgia Pond, one more grand than the other. The property was outrageously neat and clean, and ponds, ducks on the lawn. It was a beautiful setting. But then there was Mrs. Beale and Edie's mansion. I didn't know who was there when I first rode by on my bicycle, but I sure was captivated. Then, of course, I noticed a Cadillac that was in the driveway, way tucked away in the corner, hidden by overgrown trees, maples and bittersweet vines covered the Cadillac, excuse me. And I stood there, laid my bicycle down and studied all the things I could about this property, but I didn't go up to the property onto the property then. I went back to my place of work, and that night, Allison, I lie awake in my bedroom upstairs over the garage, smoking. I once did smoke. And I said, you want to go, I talked to myself, you want to go back to the mansion you just saw? And I said, well, yes. And it was a moonlit night. I would jump on my blue Peugeot bicycle and I go back to the very corner, make that left. And there were two lights one on the front porch and one on the side of the mansion upstairs. There was only two lamps burning. And I said, somebody lives here. And that freaked me out because I at first during the day thought it was an abandoned place. I didn't think anyone could live there. So after I discovered the lights on that night, I went back the following morning and I said, okay, either get arrested for trespassing or you just get told to leave the property. And I just forgot everything I knew and I had to. And I walked and climbed over all this overgrowth. I could still hear twigs snapping under my feet and I hear click and snapping. And I got stung by some insects and there was rose bushes that scratched me. But I went to the car, the Cadillac keys were still in the ignition and the driver's door was still ajar from when it was last parked. And you couldn't close the driver's door because it was so overgrown with bittersweet and every other vine. And behind the bumpers, both in front and back, were saplings, so that if it ran, which it didn't, you couldn't have pulled out of there anyway. It was covered. Tell me if I'm going on too far with the
Oh,
details.
this is fabulous.
No, because I don't want to go on and repeat things and stuff. But anyway, tell me if I do, please. Thank you. And well, I went up to the car and I looked over to my left and there was the front porch. And I went carefully through the overgrowth to the front porch, which was like a sight to behold. It was like collapsing. And above me, the wainscoting was absolutely falling away. And I seen the front door. The library had three windows with green indoors. There were shades drawn. And I specifically remember them because it was odd that these shades were cracked and deteriorating. So then I went to the front of the house, the door, Dutch door, screen door before the Dutch door. And there are benches on the side of that Dutch door on the left and right built in. And I went, when you breathe onto your eyeglasses to clear them, I did that on the pane, diamond-shaped pane aside the front door. And I cleared the smudging, all of it away so I could look in. And I did. I shall never, ever be able to relive this. I looked in and there were cobwebs just draped from every post, every chandelier, from the table to the doorways. And it was draped like it was a movie set. There was a little tunnel in which someone obviously had walked many times to the front door, which I was looking right along. Well, I said, okay. I knocked on the door and I will again never forget this. Dear Edie, walks along the banister upstairs and I see her little shoes, white, going across onto the banister. You can see that. And then she came around and then she disappeared. And then she continued to descend into the vestibule. And she came right under. She came right through the overgrowth of cobwebs and traveled to the front door. And frankly, I was really, really uptight because I had just knocked on the door of this house that I didn't know what the consequences would be. And I was thinking she or he were going to tell me to split, get off the property. Who are you? But no, I heard the latch on the Dutch door and it opened. And then I heard the spring on the screen door open, be unlatched, and dear Edie, who I didn't know her name, says she put her hand out and touched the side of my head. I had long hair, and she said, "Mother, the Marble Faun is here," loud. And I said, "Okay, I don't know who that is, but if you need any help with the property or what that is, I'm here to help you." And my reasoning was, if she was so gentle with me, maybe I could help it. My curiosity was abound. As long as I was gentle with my comments, and maybe I would be a friend, a guest, and maybe I actually could help the young girl, woman there then. She said to me, "Would you like to come back, visit mother in the morning?" I said, "Yes." And I was really, really like intimidated. After she opened the front door, the pungent odor of the mansion slammed into my face, like, and my tears were tearing up my eyes. And it was very obviously, distinctly cats, and definitely mold and rotting furniture, wood. I didn't care. And I said, "Yes, I'll be back tomorrow morning at 9." And I was. I was restless all that night. But should I go on about this?
Well, I wanted to ask you because we watched in preparation for our discussion today. I'm sure most people have seen the film Grey Gardens, but we watched that summer, and that summer is footage before the Grey Garden estate is cleaned up, and you had arrived sort of before. And what I was really fascinated about in reading your memoir was really some of those stories and experiences of the things that you saw and assisted with. So there's one point in the book where you reach out and under a sheet there's like a Christmas tree, or
Yes.
that kind of struggle of the way you sort of just became a caretaker to these women and they adopted you as family. I was really struck by the struggle of keeping the house from catching fire, but also keeping these women warm. So
Oh,
the struggle of like maintaining the space heater. Can you talk about those experiences of caring for these ladies and how they became a family to you?
almost it was immediate. That morning, Mrs. Beale is up in the center bedroom. And then there's another room called the sunroom, where they have, if you've seen the movie, a big dust up about with a quiche Lorraine. I'll put the fork in the middle here and the knife in the middle there and all this. And Mrs. Beale had a big disagreement with Edie. And it was in that room I first met Mrs. Beale that morning, first morning. I remember going up the stairs and cobwebs were just draped around and landing on my face and everything. And the smell was obviously pungent. But I walked up the stairs and Edie led me to that sunroom, which was sort of hidden behind another door and then another. And God bless Mrs. Beale's reclining on this lounge chair, and she had her hat on. She took it off and looked at me and said, "Gee, you have the most beautiful face. You need to eat a broiled chicken piece, a boiled potato, and a green salad to maintain that looks of your face." And I said, "Oh, thank you very much. I'll remember that." And then I said my deal was to help her in any way I could. And she asked me details about why I was there in East Hampton and so on. I looked around that room, Allison, and the cobwebs, besides the raccoon tails hanging from the ceiling, and the cats scurrying every which way and bellowing in the hallways. I said, "Holy mackerel, this is a scene," but it was also obvious to me that it was unsafe. Remember, I arrived in the summer. We didn't need heat then because it was a splendid summertime place. Anyway, we go leading forward towards the fire issue. After Mrs. Beale loved and began to trust me so, I was honored, and I needed to be loved. I needed to be there. I wanted to help, and no question, I didn't want any money. I didn't have any money before, and I don't have any money now. I mean, who cares? It wasn't about the dollar. It was about Mrs. Beale and Edie. they lived in the most precarious situations. And this is a point of that situation. One morning, I'm on the front porch and I'm fiddling around painting the railings. And I said, all right, I'm a little cranky. Let me go upstairs, see if I can find something to eat, crackers or peanuts. I went upstairs to the center bedroom, the room most of the film is filmed in. Don't mind me, I just had strong coffee. And Mrs. Beale's on her mattress, fiddling with the sterno can, putting out the sterno because she had made tea. And I'm watching, and she's fiddling with the lid of the sterno to put it on and just extinguish the flame, which didn't happen. What happened was the sterno and the apparatus that holds the pot, the little campfire contraption, it fell over and the flame blue went all over the mattress, onto the boxes, beside a cat lying over there, onto the newspapers. It just spread and it was blue and very small. But I'm looking, and Edie's over there in, well, frankly, La La Land, not paying a lot of attention, fiddling with her shoe. And I put the flame out. I was scared, really, I don't use profanity. Anyway, I did put the flame out, and after I cooled down, and I didn't make a scene or yell at Mrs. Beale, never. I said, Mrs. Beale, promise me that whenever you decide to cook, you'll invite me upstairs. I'd like very much to dine with you. Thus, the corn on the cob day and other moments in cooking on the mattress. Well, they were all dangerous, but at least I was there in case of a fire. So that's where that occurred, my fear of fire, which occurred a few times in the mansion during my time. God knows how many times before I arrived, there was fire threatening to burn down the mansion. So that really upset me, that flame that morning with the tea. And then, of course, Mrs. Beale was gentle with me because she invited me to have, food with her and oatmeal. And I had corn on the cob and everything. And she loved me. I loved her cooking for me. It was a bond. We bonded. I guess that's like cliche-ish, but we did. And even the heat in the winter, Allison. Brooks, he was a good gentleman. He brought over a little electric space heat, little coil, they did light up hot coils. And it worked well, but it was very hot and very hard to handle once it did become so. Well, I would plug it in. He would too at times between the two beds, and we'd heat up the room. He usually go home for the afternoon, and it was winter. And I remember shutting the bedroom center door. It was it was warped, so it couldn't close completely. The room would raise in temperature, and the heater was on. I let it stay on for a long while, or the room just got hot, and no kidding. So then I unplugged the heater and put it away so Edie couldn't find it and she wouldn't fiddle with it in the event of a fire that I might be sleeping through downstairs in the library. For some unknown reason, Mrs. Beale and Edie, I don't know if they were raised so that they didn't have to concern themselves with these things, but they were oblivious to them somehow. I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist. So that's what that was like. May I, is there another question?
Yeah, well, because I'm coming to you from the National First Ladies Library, we obviously want to talk to you about the other famous Bouviers, Lee and Jackie. Can you talk? In that summer, we see a lot of footage of Lee and how she was involved and engaged in the restoration of the house. But we know that Ari and Jackie were involved too. And in your book, you talk about Jackie's visit to the house and that you were totally unaware of who she was.
Oh,
Can you talk about meeting her and what that experience was like?
it was, I was really intimidated. I didn't know neither Lee, when I first met Lee at the beginning of the filming of that summer, 4 days in progress. It was shelved because Lee had a big dust up with Mrs. Edie, rather, of a rattan chair that was once in the children's nursery That's a whole trip, that room. But 4 days later, the film was shelved and they took off. Lee was there during the time. I made us gin gimlets in plastic tumblers and served them on the front porch. We had no ice, and Lee declined my offering her a drink. And we still remembered it at the opening night of the musical 50 years later. And I didn't know then that she was related to Mrs. Beale as a cousin, and that was her aunt, and Jackie was her sister, Mrs. Onassis. So they leave. The film is shelved. David calls the mansion 6 weeks or so later. And of course, they're always reluctant to answer the phone for reasons I cannot figure out. Ring. I answer it. I said, "Can I answer the phone, Mrs. Beale?" "Yes." I answer it. It's Albert. Oh, no, it was David. And he said he'd want to come back and make a film about Edie and Mrs. Beale. That's it. And I said, "Mrs. Beale, it's those young guys. I thought they were from university and they were learning film. They were young. I thought that's what they were about, but they were already well known, I guess." Anyway, they told me this and that in their hopes. And I said, "Hold on, I'll ask Mrs. Beale." And I did. I put the phone down. I said, "It's the young men that were here sometime, maybe a month ago or 4 weeks ago. They want to come back and make a film about you and Edie." And I said, "You know what? Maybe we can make some money." And Mrs. Beale and Edie was like all excited. And we agreed that we would have them over the mansion over to do it. And they did arrive. They also didn't come up with anybody but themselves. The vehicle they used was parked down the road at the beach, but they only came with the camera, David and Albert. And they filmed for some time. And it was wild. And Edie was so excited. It was one afternoon, Allison. Now, again, I only knew Lee as a person named Lee. So I'm at the front of the house. I, again, smoked. And I'm having a cigarette in front of the mansion, not ever in the mansion, because I was afraid to light a match in there. So I'm having a cigarette. And I look up. Brooks had cut a path down to the front porch for Newtown Grocer to be able to make deliveries to the front porch, which they did. He did, the driver, leaves them on the bench and take off. Edie would often leave a thumbtack check on the side of the door to pay prior grocery bills. I don't remember how much it was or anything. I didn't look. Well, I'm having a cigarette and I look up. It's hot. I'm again cranky because just miserable conditions. I was obligated and I didn't mind, but I was still cranky. And I had a cigarette, I put it down in the grass and put it out. And here is a gold, copper colored, big old car. I don't know what brand make it was. It was copper in color. And this fellow gets out of the front seat with a little bow tie, formal, but everything out there was superficially formal as far as the people who lived around here. That was what they did, looked like. He opens the back door and a woman steps out. I knew it was a woman because she had a kerchief on. And she comes down the front path to the little path the lawnmower with to the front, towards the front porch. And I'm looking, Allison, it was when I was 9 years old in Brooklyn, the Sister Aquinata, with my teacher in a Catholic school, came into our classroom. It was very old-fashioned school, with the bell and bang, bang, pay attention. Everyone kneel aside your desks. The president has been slain. I didn't even know what that meant. So we said, go home, pray for the president. School is closed, dismissed. I did. I went home. There's a TV, black and white. We were very poor. And I remember seeing the scene of these photographers and all this chaos. I didn't know what to make of it. But Mrs. Onassis, then it was Mrs. Kennedy, was obviously there. She was having the blood on her clothing. And you couldn't help but feel the great sympathy. This was a tragedy of biblical proportions. I knew that. I knew the president was well, being shot, had been shot, and knew who was there, and that was his wife. That was in 1964, I think the year was. I was a young man, I was a kid, 9 years old. 10 years later or less, I'm looking down the path, and this very woman is walking towards the mansion, and she takes off these huge glasses. And frankly, and be honest with you, she had some, the lips, they get calluses and stuff like cold sores. I noticed those, and she had them, and that's just observation. But I'm looking, and she took off her glasses, and she gazed upon the peaks of the mansion. I studied every. I said, "Is this possible? Is this the first lady of the United States looking right there and looking up at the mansion?" Didn't notice me really, and she gazed upon the mansion, and Edie opened the boy's bedroom window and was carrying on like a wild person, saying, "Jerry, don't let her in here. Mother's never going to forgive you. You're not supposed to let anyone in." And I was just freaked out because I did not believe who I'm looking at. Didn't speak with her yet. But Edie's carrying on like a 9-year-old, and I'm trying to be cool and collected. I looked like a dirt bomb. I had my sweatshirt on, and it was all kinds of soiled. And then Mrs. Onassis turned to me and extended herself with her little hands, and I knew instinctively to take my hand and grab 3 of her fingers and gently, like a gentleman would, address her. She addressed me. She said, "You must be Jerry. My aunt and my cousin have grown fond of you. They trust you. It's amazing, actually, that you're allowed in the mansion. And it's amazing they will trust you enough to stay over. I know all of this from my sister, Lee." I said, "Oh, that was your sister?" I thought. Remember, I'm a nervous wreck. So I'm just being steadfast, polite, and uptight for sure. And Edie came down the main stairs, opened the door, and she and Mrs. Onassis went off to the front porch towards the garden to have a powwow. You know what? I was so glad they did. I was like shaky, nervous, and I said, "Thank God they're over there, because I don't know what to say when she comes back to me." And she did. After a while, they had a little talk. And then Mrs. Onassis walked back to it down the porch steps. There were 3 steps. She said, "Jerry, I'll need you to help us." Okay. I said, "Yes, of course. I'm going to be sending over some men to clean the mansion. I'm going to send over men to do the plumbing and electricity, and they got to do some roof work on the roof." And I said, "I'm here, whatever needs to be done, because I need you to open the back door to the mansion, let them in that way. Mrs. Beale, you don't want them coming to the front door." Okay. What else? And I didn't say what else. She just gave me those instructions and bid me farewell. And I was like, "Wow, did this really happen? Am I now responsible for these ladies by in the quest to restore the mansion by no less Mrs. Jacqueline Onassis?" Um, I thought I didn't know what I was doing. I thought to myself, how is this possible? And me, I was a ragamuffin runaway kid. And they all just, I said, "Oh, okay, I'll do it," and everything, yes. But I quite didn't understand the gravity of it all until years later, 50 years later, I really became a witness to history. It's a little portion of history. And Mrs. Onassis was really, really gentle. Brown eyes, so smart looking, spoke very well. She and I did orchestrate Mrs. Beale's funeral from Southampton Hospital. And there I was over the moon upset, for Mrs. Beale had passed away. God bless her. And Mrs. Onassis was in the nurse's room. Mrs. Beale was in another room. Oh, she was like a little doll. and she was in the white linens. And I didn't really have the courage to look too much, but she was there, and she was just not the same person, physically, Almighty God. And so we began the arrangements for the funeral. At the funeral of Most Holy Trinity, I'm going to tell you this. And if I'm going on too much, just say, Jerry, enough, tell me. But I'm saying, here we are. We set up Mrs. Beale. Edie and a woman named Lois wanted to do a death mask on dear Mrs. Beale. I had no say in either or, but they didn't, and I was glad, because the priest of that parish had something taboo about it. I just knew they weren't going to do that. So we get to the church, and Mrs. Beale's little gray casket, and earlier in our relationship, Mrs. Beale had asked me to put her song for her on in the church. And I was such an immature jackass. I didn't know if that was going to be a good idea or any idea. But at the funeral in the church, I had brought the Panasonic record player, plugged it in over there. It was fleas all around it, really, still. But I put her record on it, said, "We will be together forever and ever." I can't sing. If you haven't noticed, I have no. I can't sing. Anyway, that song was played, scratching and all, and Mrs. Onassis was right there. I was one pew behind Mrs. Onassis. She was with her nephews. I don't remember who they were. She was also with another person. I think it was a bodyguard and a chauffeur. And she started to cry. And I was really touched by that. She did. And I was like, thank goodness someone, well, in this family has such feelings for Mrs. Beale. It's only about time to express something about them. Anyway, it was freezing February day, and the grave was opened, and the ice had formed. There were boulders of mud frozen. So it was a brutal winter day, and we went to the church cemetery. I just couldn't handle it anymore, and I just got away from the family because I was emotional, and I felt stupid being emotional. So I backed off, and we had the mass, the ceremony, and the burial. And dear Edie said to me, Mother loves you. And I said, I couldn't believe how gentle she'd become with me, considering all the drama she opposed me to and Mrs. Beale. And that includes the attic book story, all of these things. But now she was totally a human being, totally on board my feelings. And I didn't say anything because I was just choked up and I couldn't really speak. So I said, thank you. I was invited to go out to a French restaurant on Montauk Highway. Frankly, I didn't want to go, and it didn't. It's called Le Beau Geste, something like this, French, and it was an old building. I don't know if it was good. I couldn't go there. I couldn't afford to dine there, but I was invited, and I was glad I didn't go because I couldn't. Frankly, I had a resentment for the family, the brothers. There's two. I don't want to use any profanity. Here we are. Oh, you're here again finally. Where were you 2 nights ago when you spoke to me? You were at a dinner table. Down in, not in Florida, in Long Island, like near Huntington or something. What's going on, Jerry? I said. He said, I said, well, Mrs. Beale is very ill. I think she's going to go away. And he said, well, do the best you can. I'm at a dinner party. And I just got really angry, period. So that's how I met Mrs. Onassis. Funniest, can I tell you this portion?
Sure.
Mrs. Beale would be upstairs. The phone would ring, not endlessly, often. And it was ringing, ringing, ringing. And I said, no one's going to answer that. Mrs. Beale, may I answer the telephone? It's been ringing since 12 noon. I mean, it's ringing. I did. I picked up the receiver. And hello, Mrs. Beale, Edith. I said, oh, who is this? Oh, it's Mr. Arianosas. Who is this? I said, Jerry. He said, oh, I know, I've heard of you. No, he had very heavy duty Greek accent. Frankly, I was turned on to his accent. I won't kid you. Oh, this guy sounds so rugged. Yeah. Anyway, I went, gave the phone to Mrs. Beale, and I went downstairs to the pantry. There was a second working phone. And I took you're speaking, you take off the speaker in the bottom of the phone so they can't hear you. And I put the other end to my ear, and I heard them discussing, Mr. Onassis just had to talk, I could tell, to Mrs. Beale because his son had passed away in a collision on an airplane. And Mrs. Beale did comfort him like a mother knows how to comfort her sons. She was splendidly human. And I listened and listened. Then I go, okay, I understand why he called. And I carefully put the phone down and returned the speaker to the end of the phone. It was in the pantry. It was then I spoke to Mr. Onassis very briefly. And I think he's from the sound of his voice, he was a quiet gentleman and certainly a good provider. And that's all I could tell you about him. But I think he's the person who had the interview set up for me to work overseas for the royal family. After Mrs. Beale's funeral, after I asked Edie, what are you going to do now? She said, I'm going to go back to the mansion. She didn't invite me to come back, and I didn't ask to come back. But she did say she was going to get back to the mansion. And she did. For 2 years, she lived there, as Mrs. Beale had predicted. But in fact, I think it was a business reasoning too. So she could, I don't know, business like that, but she did stay for 2 years. I noticed she set up Mrs. Beale's bed with a bird cage from the boys' room and a lamp and a little light bulb, you know? Okay, goodbye. I don't know.
Jerry, can you tell us what it's like, the experience of having this film, this document of you as a young man, as a teenager, live as this? I think of my experience as a teenager and some of the crazy things that I wouldn't want people to know. It's just so interesting that you have this really amazing document of you as a young man, finding family, coming out, this very important sort of era in your life on film. What has that been like?
To see it recorded on movie film, whatever you want to call that film, I'm honored because I didn't even have a camera. Nobody would have taken a picture of me anyway. But it was nice to see myself as a young man and just remember the cherished moments that we shared at Great Gardens. And what was it like? It's a record of my young years, and it's an honor. I was thrilled. It also, like, it was a little touching. I don't watch that film to Mrs. Beale's and Edie's film, Great Gardens, too often, because the moment the screen door comes into view in the film, I'm taken away from the reality I'm in today, right back to the very day I knocked on that window pane. It's very emotional for me. Was it like, I'm glad it's been recorded. I'm going to tell you, when I went to my brother's wedding during my life there, the family either thought I was out of my mind, I had too much to drink, and or my mother would say to them, oh, no, he lives with the Beatles. And I said, it's not the Beatles, it's the Beales. And she would never change that word. It was always the Beatles. And she met Mrs. Beale and Edie through the screen door years later when she came to get me to come home, my father. What was it like seeing that film recorded? I will be honest with you. It freaks me out still in a good way, in an emotional way. When Albert and I were reunited, after 15 years, and he told me they're going to do a play based on the film, Mrs. Beale and Edie's film. and that it was like a wonderful reunion. I could finally speak with Al about the rarest of moments in our lives. You know, the times we shared. He was a gentleman during the filming. He was always behind the camera. I couldn't see what he was doing. But he was right behind. It looked like a bazooka from warfare or something. He told me they're going to make a film. I mean, a musical, a play actually first. And we both went to a reading of that play, musical, at Guggenheim. It was very interesting. And I said, Al, how can they possibly do that? Who could play Mrs. Beale and Edie? But they did, and a very cherished musical, which I was really happy to see make it. You know, what was it like? Unusual and rare as Mrs. Bill and Edie. The whole thing has been rare. I couldn't imagine my life winding up at the front porch of that mansion and the relationship we shared and the love that I was given. Allison, Mrs. Bill was really bright. And I didn't know anything about, well, frankly, most things. I just didn't. Art history and song and dance and things I didn't find interesting until that time. Everything I learned basically was from that time at Grey Gardens. Mrs. Bill was educating me. I didn't know it. Sometimes I was bored, and she would read verse from her mind, like friends, Romans, countrymen, come lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. I said, what is this? What are you talking about? But I didn't say that. I listened. And all kinds of verse and Longfellow and David Thoreau, however. Um, Jesus, Lord, it was the most tender, enlightening moment. And I have honored Mrs. Bill and Edie the entire time I've been alive. And it's a funny thing, not funny, it's seriously dedicated to. Mrs. Beale once Easter season said to me, could you go to St. Patrick's and place a bouquet of flowers on my family altar? I said, you have an altar in St. Patrick's? That wasn't being silly or disingenuous. I just couldn't sort of get used to that idea. But I did. I saved some money, bought railroad tickets to Manhattan. Then I walked to St. Pat's. I didn't buy a bouquet of flowers right then because I didn't know, one, if she did have, Mrs. Bill had an altar, two, if I could afford a bouquet of flowers, which I couldn't. So what I did was I found, after circling the inside of the cathedral, I finally discovered the altar. And it was there, it's still there. It was just around Easter. And honest to God Almighty, I go there every season and leave a flower. I can't afford Manhattan price of bouquet. Okay, thank you.
As we're wrapping up, I wondered if we could talk a little about art. So besides those early experiences that you were talking about, exploring a graveyard and learning about stone cutting, your mother took you to the World's Fair in 1964, and you saw the Pietà, which made me think also that Jacqueline Kennedy a few years earlier brought the Mona Lisa to Washington, D.C. and New York. So I'm thinking about these amazing art experiences that were accessible at that time period. I just wondered if you could speak about the arts and your experience and that experience as a child and how that's influenced you and art making.
Oh, wow. It was a World's Fair, Vatican Pavilion. My mother and I went there several times. We lived in Brooklyn. It was 2 trains away. And well, I went to the Ford Pavilion, the St. Clair, the Dinosaur Pavilion, General Electric. It was all very cool. I loved it. But we did find the Vatican Pavilion. And my mother and I, God bless her, took me there. And there was, the rolling wraps in the airport, you stand on them and they go faster than you could walk or something like that. But I was on one of those with Mom. And she's holding my hand, and I'm sort of like, okay, where are we going now? I know what I was doing. But there was Michelangelo's masterpiece, the Pietà, and Allison immediately taken back by the tenderness of the woman, his mother's face, and the gesture of our Lord's body, and the magnificence of humanity. And I said to my mother, all of those things, not then, but I do feel those ways now, in describing what I felt then. I went to my mom, I looked up, I said, who's this? What's this? She said, this is a sculpture of our Lord with his mother. And I just said to myself, Mom, is this the stone that Uncle Freddie's teaching me to clean in the house for his house? She didn't know much about stone. I didn't know either, but it was made of granite, and that piece is made of granite. And I said, how on earth does a person yield such tenderness from a stone so unyielding, which really reminded me of my very start in life. How could something that I felt so genuinely tender about, could I express in a stone most unyielding and not so friendly and nearly impossible? It was made of Carrara marble. Yes, you're right, Audrey. Pardon me, I wasn't sure. And then I'll tell you what else. It really changed my view on art and sculpture. And I've been carving since '87, and I love it. Now I work at the Art Students League. You know, that's what touched me, that piece of sculpture. And I learned more about art through my visions, seeing them, and I just love it. I mean, it's my world. It'll be around when I'm not. And I like to express my ideas in this material. Thanks.
Well, Jerry, it has been wonderful to talk to you and hear stories from your past and to learn about your art making process. I could ask you questions all day, but our hour is up. So
Oh, yes.
I want to encourage people to check out the film Grey Gardens, as well as that summer, and the Beales of Grey Gardens, and the many related films. There is even a film you can watch about Jerry on Vimeo, where you can watch him carve stone, which was really amazing. And I also want to encourage you to read The Marble Faun of Grey Gardens, Jerry's memoir. It is amazing. It's a really great read. Even if you've seen Grey Gardens a million times and you think you know everything about it, you will learn so much more, as well as more about Jerry's amazing life and experience. Grey Gardens is just the tip of exciting, fabulous, interesting things that Jerry has encountered. So thank you so much, Jerry Torre. It was a pleasure to meet you. Everyone in the chat has been so positive and grateful and impressed. You're the perfect Valentine's Day discussion, because you're just so loving in the way that you describe the Beales as a family. So this has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Allison, and everyone who's here and listening, Grey Gardeners. It's a joy to finally see Mrs. Beale and Edie sort of, sometimes not, appreciated, and they have their very venue of song and dance reach so many people through a little film. It's an honor to be alive and to see that. Not for me, no, because they deserve it, and they deserved it then, but now they have now they have reached the fruition. The musical they would have loved. Just honored to be alive. Thank you, everyone. Grey Gardeners, Allison, and anyone who can hear me and speaks English. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we encourage people to check out the book, connect with us, the National First Ladies Library, on Facebook or social media or via Eventbrite. We will send out a link to everyone who registered with a recording of this program, and a link so you can access the film if you haven't already, and you can purchase Jerry's book, and you can even get a signed copy personally from him. So fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have a very happy Valentine's Day.
Oh, thanks, Allison, so much.
Thank you.